Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Gas Resource Management Working Group 1. My name is Brenda Corona, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group at the California ISO. We welcome you to our kickoff of our Gas Resource Management series, and we also have a handful of few ISO subject matter experts and managers who will be here participating in our call to provide input. We will be going over specifics on this meeting and be able to submit any questions in chat. But first, we want to go over a few meeting reminders as today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. So for these collaborative working groups are intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. So we encourage any comments to be professional, respectful as well. Please refrain from repeating any other comments, but we do encourage any comments that are agreed upon other stakeholders. As for the instructions for this WebEx meeting, we do have everyone connected mostly through the WebEx feature. Please use the raise hand icon that's located in the middle portion of the bottom of your screen. Once you select the raise hand icon, you will be entered into a queue. Keep in mind the new WebEx feature does lock your muting function. So when you are unmuted during the questions, please do not mute yourself because it will lock that ability to ask a question. So the event producer, Michelle, and I will be here to assist any questions, and those who are dialed in through the phone line only, please press #2 to ask a question. As a reminder, for those who are entering questions through chat or through the verbal queue, make sure to state your name and affiliation before speaking, and if not, I'll make sure to give you all a reminder just for everyone in awareness. At this time, we wanted to introduce this draft timeline that will break down from the start of right now, where we did seek input surveys a few weeks ago, and we appreciate those surveys and questions that were submitted. At this time, we are moving forward through the next few phases of the working group. At this time, the working groups are to inform an action plan intended to articulate the stakeholder vision, strategy, and roadmap for this initiative process. So what that means is that we are currently intending to help solidify issues, create common understanding, the scope, and prioritize issues, and also determine the shape of the next steps for the possible market enhancements. So we want to make sure this is also intended, and we want to go ahead and we might have a few people, subject matter experts, go over this again, but I want to go back to this one for a stakeholder policy initiative that is really familiar with many folks today, is that right now we are also currently within the proposal development phase and heading towards direction for an action plan. So at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Mark Richardson, who will be helping out facilitate this call, and feel free to send me any technical issues to Michelle and I. We will be here to help. Mark, let's go ahead.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Can you confirm you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking the time this afternoon to kind of start framing up what does the resource gas management working group look like. So a few things I'll be covering today is, the associated roles of the working group, the purpose of the working group, what those goals are, provide some details around the deliverables, talk about some potential scope topics with the community, kind of dive in and kind of get everyone to start thinking about what some of those guiding principles might look like. That way, when we work through this working group process, we're keeping those in mind as we start talking about associated problem statements and things like that. You do see Danny Johnson as one of the panelists, as well as Sylvie Spiewak. They are here just to kind of help assist any questions we might get as their subject matter experts. They are a participant just like you in this process. I am the facilitator, and my goal is to try to help create that collaborative dialogue between the ISO and its stakeholders, right? This is going to be in a very informed process. You're going to have multiple opportunities to provide comments and feedback throughout the entire thing with, at the end of the day, hopefully a very well-informed, stakeholder-driven straw proposal that gets created. All right, let's go to the next slide so I can start talking a little bit about the working group structure roles. All right, so as I mentioned, I am the facilitator. We're currently working externally to see if we can also get, where I could potentially be a co-facilitator, where we would have one of the stakeholders also acting as that facilitator role. Our responsibility is to kind of help guide discussion, drive towards resolution of issues, and work towards those deliverables that we're going to define as a group today. The scribe, that's going to be Isabella. She is a step. She's going to be working through capturing some of those meaningful notes, and will also absolutely be helping assist some of that discussion paper items that I'm going to be talking about here in the coming slides as well. And then we have the working group participants, right? They provide ideas, proposals, input, and vetting, right? Working groups are open to all stakeholders. ISO staff, as I mentioned, will be participants in this. Again, these working groups are designed to be stakeholder driven. All right, let me go to the next slide here. I believe I have presenter, right? Fantastic. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the gas management working group, right? The gas resource management initiative will establish stakeholder working groups aiming to foster that transparency and trust that I've been talking about, and at the end of the day, enhance the quality of the market design. This process is intended to engage stakeholders, empower stakeholders through their active participation to help inform that policy and justify problem statements and these guiding principles today. It also promotes shared ownership, right? It's collective feedback. It's solutions and issues that the community feels need to be addressed, both in the context of the day ahead as well as real-time markets. And then fostering that mutual trust with one another, right? These are meant to be entirely collaborative, so please do your best to be professional and keep in mind your audience on this call. The outcome of this stakeholder collaboration is a better informed gas resource management policy that is responsive to the diverse perspective across stakeholder community. All right. So I'll go through a few slides and then I'm going to pause for questions. So apologies that I'm flying through. I know when we get towards the end, when we start talking about scope topics and those draft principles, I think at that point in time, I want to leave as much time as possible for discussion. Looking at the comments here, it looks like there's a few individuals that cannot see the presentation. Is that, or Brenda or Michelle, are you able to help me?
The presentation is showing. I'm working with those individuals separately. Thank you.
Okay, apologies. I just wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to see the slides. And they are posted, so by all means, they will be out there. And again, we'll have opportunity for comments and things like that. All right. All right, the goals of this working group, right? And again, this is kind of just high level. When I think about what the goals of a working group should be, here's kind of what I come to. And again, we're open to feedback here, right? So the goal of this working group is really to kind of start forming some of those problem statements, right? Define and illustrate principles for that market design, form those problem statements that are reflecting the stakeholder concerns. And we've heard numerous concerns already through various forms, and I'm going to try to articulate those in the coming slides to kind of get everyone's juices flowing, right? We want to align on the priorities and establish the cadence, right? So when I talk about priorities is what problem statements are the gorillas in the room? Which ones truly have an impact that are market-wide and that aren't necessarily unique to a given generator based on its current condition, right? We're not talking about edge case issues. What type of items that we identify as a problem statement benefit the entire market as a whole, right? And then we start talking about establishing cadence for these working groups, right? I think the current thought is to have 5 to 6 calls, maybe 2 to 3 hours per call. We're going to be looking for feedback from the community. For those that remember, we had the EDAM working groups a few years back. It's crazy how time flies. Those were quite intense, right? There was a lot to talk about and things like that. I don't know if we want to be that intense. There's several other working groups getting spun up right now here at the ISO. So we want to be mindful of all the stakeholders and the various meetings that are going on out there, right? Goal number 3 is to illustrate and justify problem statements. Explore current ISO market operations, functionalities, and processes that are meant to address these problem statements. Develop methodology for analysis. Define data needs that are required so that participants have informed decisions around what direction we want to go. And then we're going to determine some action items with goal number 4. Have a plan for each problem statement. Provide a bridge between the working groups and the proposal at the end of the day. Moving to the next slide. All right, so in 2 slides, I'm going to kind of further talk about the discussion paper and action plan, and then I'm going to pause for questions. At a high level, though, the working group, in my mind, has 2 deliverables. It has the discussion paper. This discussion paper is going to be published after each working group. It's going to reflect the associated topics that we talked about. It's going to reflect what type of progress we're making towards those problem statements and goals that have been established. And it's going to provide additional opportunities for stakeholders to kind of reflect, comment, and prepare for that next working group discussion. I am very hopeful that some of you individuals are willing to present on some of your issues that you're seeing. And, you know, by all means, reach out to Brenda and myself. And again, you can provide those comments. A few of you have already expressed that desire to present, and we appreciate that collaborativeness. And then the action plan, right? That's kind of the result of this working group. And that's going to act as a bridge between this process and that final straw proposal, right? It's going to be a stakeholder-led, stakeholder-informed action plan that really gets that straw proposal off on the right foot, in the right direction, and everyone's moving in sync. So let me provide a little bit more details around the discussion paper, kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, and then I'll talk about the action plan, and then we'll go ahead and pause for questions and or comments. So for the discussion paper, again, the purpose of the discussion paper will be to serve as a resource for stakeholders, provide a starting point for discussion on upcoming working group meetings, create the record of any quote-unquote, decisions is a strong word, right? Any common themes, common topics that individuals coalesce around, we're going to provide a record of that. That way everyone can kind of go back, take a look, and see how the discussion has evolved throughout these meetings. And it allows stakeholders to reflect and prepare in between those working group meetings. The content. So in lieu of the reports or working group summaries, the scribe and facilitator, so myself and Isabella, will be updating the discussion paper to reflect added and refined scope items, right? Nothing's finalized, nothing's final in these working groups, but it gives indication as to the direction that we're going for that straw proposal. And then, I may be asking, ISO staff, based on stakeholder feedback, to provide some input on various topics and potentially even some analysis, some of that data needs that we talked about earlier. And then number 3 is stakeholder involvement. The discussion paper will reflect all scope items and decisions that are being made by stakeholders, and then the paper will be posted out on that initiative page between the working groups for comments. All right, last slide, and then I promise I'll pause for questions here. So the action plan, I talked a little bit about it already, but let me kind of further define it here. The action plan is going to serve as that bridge between the working group and straw proposal by prescribing a plan to address identified stakeholder concerns. The authors are going to be the scribe, the facilitator, and the policy lead. So Sylvia is our policy lead here. The content, right? It's going to recap all the viewpoints discussed during the working group sessions. It's going to identify agreed upon problem statements and problem assessments, prescribes action items to guide policy direction, pursue additional supporting analysis, and form the basis of that straw proposal. Again, once this action plan is posted as an outcome of these calls, there shouldn't be any surprises as to what's going into that plan because it's been evolving throughout the working group sessions, and there's going to be an opportunity for the community to provide comments on that will help inform that first straw proposal. All right, I talked quite a bit. I'm going to take a drink of water, pause a second, and see if there's any questions. So Michelle, Brenda, if you want to help me out with hands, I would appreciate it.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand icon that's located on the bottom of the WebEx window or on your phone. If you're using a mobile device, once your hand is raised, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. All right, we do have a question. Caller, please go ahead.
You may be on mute. I'm not hearing anything. And please make sure to announce yourself and organization, please.
Hi, Mark. This is Michelle Tobermore with LEDWP.
How you doing, Michelle?
Good, good. I have a question regarding the optimization and model itself for KaiSo. Is there a plan to get the comments for this and update the optimization? I'll give you an example, like if there's tier pricing and volumes, to include that into the KaiSo model?
Yeah, I think a lot of things are on the table at this point in time, and to the extent you want to provide some of those comments as, once we get into some of the scope items that I've identified through previous conversations, I think that would be a perfect time to kind of weigh in and provide those details, and to the extent you're willing, Michelle, to potentially present on that scoping item in an upcoming working group session.
Okay, thank you. I think that clarifies the idea of this working group for myself.
Yeah, and I think it will help a little bit once I get into some of the scoping items of what we're looking to tackle here. I did have an opportunity to read some of the comments that were provided, and I absolutely appreciate all of those that have already provided comments. So I'll talk a little bit about those once we frame up some of these scope items.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, any other questions?
Yes, we do have a question. Caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
You may be on mute.
Yep.
Not hearing anything.
It was Brian. I just unmuted your line. If you have a question, please go ahead. I'm not hearing anything there. So just a reminder, if anyone has a question, please use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen.
All right, and I'm able to see Brian with his hand up. So Brian, maybe we'll circle back to you. I did see your comments. I see your hand back up. You want to try unmuting again, sir? Still not hearing you. All right, hopefully Brian gets his audio issues worked out. I don't see any other hands. Do you, Michelle?
I do not.
All right. With that, I will move forward. And Brian, if you feel you've addressed your audio issues, shoot us a ping here in the chat, and we'll get back to you, sir. All right. So here's where, this is why I kind of did a quick run through those slides, because I think this is going to be the meat of the conversation. And again, the purpose of today's meeting is to try to help frame up the purpose of this working group and some of the problem statements, understanding that there's going to be more scoping items and things like that. And while we can probably chat about some of those at a high level today, I think it's probably going to be more appropriate that those items get provided in your comments based on that discussion paper, and then we'll go ahead and start tackling those in the next working group. So some of the problems that I've had preview to working with various entities across the community, I tried to capture here. I also went back and looked at the CCW initiative, read through that and looked through some of those comments. And I think this represents, at a high level, a good portion of those concerns and pain points from a stakeholder community perspective. So number one was not enough flexibility for participants to accurately reflect their verifiable cost expectations in the market. And verifiable is a key term that I threw in there because through stakeholder comments, through some of the concerns that were raised through other initiatives, the costs at the end of the day need to be verifiable, right? Number two, insufficient information to inform procurement targets, right? How much gas do I need to buy based on energy awards that have yet to be determined? I saw that being a struggle or an area of improvement. Resource limitations are not adequately accounted for, right? So some resources might have 2 fuel zones, different heat rates potentially, things like that. Number 4, gas system limitations are not reflected in the market. And then lastly, inadequate cost recovery, right? So there are mechanisms for cost recovery, but reading through those comments, I believe it is appropriate to include this as inadequate cost recovery based on some of that feedback. All right, so let me pause there and see if there's any Any questions or reaction to what I have listed here? Is there anything blatantly missing? And again, there will be opportunity to provide those comments after this call, and we'll work to get those included. So let me pause and see if we can get any hands up.
Just click the raise hand icon. I will go ahead and unmute your line as soon as I see your hand raised.
Not seeing anything. So I know several individuals provided some comments. It's hard for me to say who's all in attendance today, but to the extent somebody's comfortable speaking on some of these. Michelle, I heard you chime in a little bit earlier. You were talking about the multi-tier. Oh, I see Stuart Kelly from LA. How you doing, Stuart? Go ahead. Michelle, did you want to unmute Stuart, please?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, I believe that captures certainly what I've heard from other stakeholders, these 5 bullets. I would add to the inadequate cost recovery, I think there's a degree of automation that may be able to occur compared to the manual processes that are out there just now. But I think you've managed to, capture the key concerns from what I've heard. So thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that feedback. I'm glad I was somewhat on target in representing the community appropriately. And we'll talk a little bit about, once we get into some of these principles, one of the principles that were identified was, feasibility and simplicity. And I think that's where that automation comes into play, right? Right now, some of the cost recovery measures is a potential filing at FERC to recover those costs. And obviously that can be cumbersome and things like that. So we'll absolutely get into those principles and things like that. Michelle, I see your hand back up. Go ahead.
I do think, and I'll agree with Stuart here, that the issues here are pretty well compiled. I think we got to keep in mind, though, that when we start discussing this, each gas pipeline and each participant might have different limitations, and I believe that's what's going to be difficult to model, because there's more reliability issues on certain pipelines versus others.
Got it. No, that's good to hear. And one of the principles that I'll go into, and maybe we'll go into them next, and we can circle back to some of these scope items, because that is one of the identified items I have in the principles as well. So thank you, Michelle. Any other, let me see if I can see. Oh, I do see VJ from Pacificor. Let me go to you, VJ.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, one of the things we were hoping would be covered in this working group was just some kind of discussion on the challenges associated with the difference in timeline between the gas trading day and the power trading day, and trying to see if there were some maybe simple solutions or ideas that others had in managing those challenges. And we may be getting into that conversation in some of these problem statements as we go through anyways, but I just wanted to highlight that as well.
No, I appreciate that. And that is for every one of the comments we received, that was kind of something that was common across all of them. And I do capture that in a later slide. And maybe when we get to that in a later slide, maybe we could talk a little bit more in depth about that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate you commenting. All right. Any other comments before I move on? Start getting into some of these principles here. Going once. All right. Not seeing any hands. Thank you for those who were willing to speak up. Appreciate it. Let's go on to the next slide here. So these are draft principles. I want to be clear, because the purpose of this working group is to try to establish some of these principles together. But what I wanted to do is kind of get us started off in the right direction, right? These principles should be kept in mind when moving throughout the working group process. These principles are going to be based on stakeholder feedback. You know, everything I've read up to this point, this is kind of what I was able to derive from a principle perspective, even though we haven't necessarily asked what principles do you think we should keep in mind, things like that. So I'm hoping that with these principles, we could kind of use them as guardrails when we start talking about scoping items that we want to tackle in this policy and things like that, right? So 4 very high-level things come to mind: efficiency, simplicity, transparency, and feasibility, right? And then as we work through these problem statements, let's be sure to keep those in mind. So let me go to the next slide and kind of start framing these up a little bit here. Looks like my computer's frozen just a little bit. Hopefully it. Michelle, can you confirm it moved the next slide?
Yeah, slide 14.
All right, perfect, thank you. So efficiency, and again, this is all in the context of you know, energy markets, gas markets, things like that, right? So to me, efficiency means a few things, right? Incentive compatibility. Most, if not every participant can achieve the best outcome for their unit via the market, right? Real-time dispatch is based on offered prices that are going to be, that will help minimize the true production costs across the system, right? Ratepayers at the end of the day. Assets want to produce that clear dispatch megawatt amount, right? Based on the outcome, because they know those costs are reflected and covered. And then lastly, participants have an incentive to reflect those verifiable costs in the market. Okay, so that when I think about efficiency, that's what comes to my mind. And if anyone's willing to comment on that, by all means, please raise your hand. Again, there's going to be an opportunity to provide feedback throughout this entire process on these principles. Not seeing any hands, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. All right, simplicity. So simple logic that applies broadly. Michelle, I heard you talk about how, you know, certain systems have various constraints across the system. So when we think about what we want to do from a problem statement and a solution perspective, is at the end of the day, it needs to be simple that can be applied. You know, that logic that gets defined needs to be simple and applied across the footprint, right? Uniform pricing, and then accommodations for cost adjustments are consistent, right? Everyone understands what they are. It's straightforward, it's simple. Let me pause there and see if there's any reaction to this slide. And oh, I see Michelle with her hand up. Go ahead, Michelle.
I'd like to add, or maybe clarify here, that the accommodation for cost adjustment is also cost recovery. If the market dispatches the units and the price that we end up paying to the cost that we end up paying to make up the gas for those units, if it wasn't originally required, it might not be what was reflected on the original bid. So a mechanism for that cost recovery needs to be pretty straightforward, especially in the real-time market.
Got it. Right. Some form of automation is what I'm hearing, and I think that ties into simple as well.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your feedback, Michelle. Not seeing any other hands. Let me give it a second, see if anyone else has something they want to add. And then I haven't heard from the ISO. So Sylvie, Danny, if you guys would like to elaborate on anything that I'm stating or give any of your thoughts, please raise your hand and I'd be willing to call on you as well. All right, going to the next slide. Transparency, right? So from a transparency perspective, participants know what prices are being utilized in the market. Everyone has sufficient information at the same time of determining their positions heading into the day ahead in real-time markets. Everyone, really what I was looking to tackle here is from a transparency perspective, we hear about advisory schedules in some of the previous sessions and things like that with the community. Everyone has an idea as to what's anticipated, and therefore with that transparency, they're able to set up their energy bids and schedules accordingly, right? Are there any comments or questions on transparency? And Sylvie, if I missed the mark on this one, please raise your hand and I'd be happy to call on you to expand. All right, looks like I'm good there. No comments, questions? All right, you guys are being easy on me. Let me go to the next one here. All right, feasibility. So this is the fourth one. This is not the final principle. Again, I was trying to keep it as simple as possible. I don't want to get stuck on semantics and things like that. I think the problem statements is kind of the biggest bang for our buck when we work through this initiative, but it's really important to utilize these principles as those guardrails. All right, so for feasibility, it's operationally feasible. The market can solve within a prescribed timeline, right? At the end of the day, is it possible to code for everything? Yeah, maybe, but what type of risk does that introduce, right? And what does that do to the current market timelines? I wanted to capture feasible within the implementation timelines of this actual policy and initiative from a technology perspective. Again, going back to how complicated do we really want to get in policy, right? And then at the end of the day, from a feasibility perspective, we need to make sure that the data confidentiality of these resources are respected, right? So we don't want to come up with a problem statement that potentially goes against protecting one particular unit's sensitive information, right, from a market perspective. So when we talk about feasibility and we talk about these scope items, let's try to keep that in mind as well. Let me pause for a second, take a drink of water, and see if there's, all right, Michelle again. I appreciate your collaboration, Michelle. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think when we talk about feasibility here, what's really going to be critical is the gas forecasting. The gas forecasting is really going to drive how feasible things are on the gas side. Obviously the optimization and other inputs, the way that the enhancements end up being implemented is going to be critical to that, because we're going to have to forecast EIM and potentially in the future the EDEM transfers or dispatch. Also, like, we want to point out that the feasibility component with a combination of the gas forecasting and the gas world after 5 p.m. and 5:15 Pacific Standard Time, we can no longer procure gas in real time. We have to wait for an after the fact market. Some markets don't have, and then some markets do not have an imbalanced market like SoCal Gas. So all of this has to be taken into consideration when we're talking about how feasible things are.
Right, and when you talk about that forecast, you're looking for transparency and an accurate forecast of how much gas LA in this example would need to procure to ensure you're minimizing that exposure after that gas trading market has quote unquote closed, right? Am I following you?
Yeah, correct. And I mean, when we talk about transparency, I think for EIM, like, we know we have some kind of data already, but for EDAM, we're going to be starting fresh, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty there. So I feel that each end user needs to have a good idea of the wide footprint of what's going on overall, because that's going to impact the way that they optimize it, and how we end up procuring the natural gas to support that dispatch.
No, that's good to know. And Michelle, I might come back to you when I get to the slide, because I would like to hear, and maybe I'll kind of plant the seed now so you can think about it. But what is the problem statement today without knowing the entire gas schedule across the footprint, right? When you talk about how much gas is going to be burned across the footprint. Is that important to know, right? So if you could think about that problem statement, I'll go to Brian, and then when I get to that slide, I'll tee you back up. I appreciate that. Brian, let's see if you got your mute figured out, sir.
I hope so, Mark. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, sir. How you doing?
Very good. Nice to see you. Changing my audio source has helped. Hey, I don't know if you are open to a suggestion for another principle at this point, but I've got one if you are.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this one may butt up a little bit or rub against the feasibility, but I'd offer that whatever we look at in this group, the solution ought to be comprehensive. A lot of what the ISO deals with is edge cases, right? And I'm just thinking about, for example, the resource efficiency evaluation discussions that they really hinge on, looking at very improbable but affecting scenarios. And so I greatly appreciate the ISO launching this effort, but I think a lot of what we're going to be looking at is these edge cases. So whatever problem we're looking at, I hope that we can think about a solution that will work in all cases and not just most. So thanks for putting input.
No, I tried to capture that here, Brian. Hopefully it captures the spirit of that one. To me, that kind of ties into simplicity, right? It's simple logic that applies across the board, right? For 95% of those cases. So hopefully that's captured here. If not, we could talk a little bit more and provide that in your comments if you feel it's not. Appreciate you chiming in. All right, I got Lindsay with NV. How you doing, Lindsay?
Hi, Mark. I'm good. And I just wanted to first state thank you so much for starting these workshops and starting this effort. We're going to be very supportive of this and very interested in this topic. I had a question about this feasibility slide, and I was wondering if this would at all limit a solution that's developed out of the workshop. If, for instance, we identify some sort of solution and it might be challenging with some of the market, some other market feature or something like that, would we be able to discuss the trade-offs of?
For sure.
That? Okay.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think if we capture that as, to the extent we capture that as a scope item, you help tee up what that problem statement looks like. I think there's always some level of trade-off with any new design, right? But I think those are the type of things that potentially could get worked out either in this form and help inform the associated straw proposal, or kind of have that higher level conversation from a community perspective, does it make sense to have that trade-off?
Okay, I think that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you commenting as well. I went through your comments, so thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on here. And I think this is where we potentially tie back into some of the other scope topics, right? So if you recall the previous slide where I had a few items that I believe to be kind of those bigger nuggets that would be a great starting point from a scope perspective to tackle. As we kind of frame up these scope items, again, try to think about and articulate what that problem statement looks like, and think about those 4 principles that were just laid out, going back to transparency, simplicity, feasibility, and what was the last one there? Efficiency, right? So we got to be efficient at the end of the day. So always think about those when we think about scoping items, and I think that's going to really help us kind of stay within those guardrails, right? So the first one here, and Michelle, I think you alluded to it, or no, I'm sorry, that was VJ at Pacificor, right? Aligning the gas and electric market timeline, right? What is that problem statement, and how does this impact market participation today? Now, I know this particular item has been discussed many times in the past, and I have a few subject matter experts on the line that could probably help contextualize and frame up a little bit better than I could as to why the decision was made to not go down that route. And I think it kind of ties back into that feasibility principle. But Brad, if you're willing to raise your hand and unmute and maybe provide a little bit of clarity there, or Danny, if you are, I would appreciate it.
Sorry, Mark, you cut out. I didn't hear the ask. I'll let Danny go first, and then I'll just add on, okay, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So this was something that the ISO examined doing back in 2015. And there's a decent amount of documentation on why the ISO didn't end up going in this direction. Some of the concerns were if you don't know the price of the gas that you're bidding into the market, you may include additional risk premium. So from an efficiency standpoint, you may know your dispatch, but the prices may not be as accurate. There was a lot of operational challenges and concerns regarding forecasting inaccuracy by moving the market timeline before the gas market. I think we're definitely open to exploring this, but I would just ask everybody on this call if you can go back and kind of refresh on some of the challenges that the ISO faced when the ISO looked to align these two markets a few years ago. I think that could inform future conversations in this working group process.
All right. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. And Brad, did you want to add anything before I go to VJ?
I would just say that I agree with everything that Danny said. I was actually on an initiative in 2013 where we discussed the combining of the markets in a national forum in Houston, Texas, and that included input from PG&E, SoCalGas, and Kern River Gas, the big three in our footprint. And so we had the same thing. So those are documented as well, and people can refer to those documents. Those were done through a NASB initiative that rolled up to FERC in 2013. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Michelle, if you wouldn't mind unmuting VJ's line, I'd like to hear his thoughts or reaction at least. And again, you know, there will be an opportunity for comments after this call. And by all means, you know, I have a feeling we'll get quite a bit based on the topics we're talking about today, but I look forward to going through that. So go ahead, VJ.
Yep, this is VJ from Pacific Corp. Thanks, Brad and Danny, for some background on that. Appreciate it. And we can definitely go back and look at some of those documents. It would be helpful if you could just throw those in the chat too at some point, so I don't have to dig through the CAISO website. And also just a thought, I mean, maybe in one of the initial working group meetings, if we're going to discuss this more, it would be helpful to just get some background from the CAISO, maybe some slides or a little presentation on kind of how it went back in 2015 and 2013, because a lot of us probably weren't around then. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And when I get to that slide, VJ, I'll make sure to take that as an action item and assign one of our subject matter experts to kind of help frame that up for the next working group, because we do plan on doing a level set, and I'll explain what that means. So thank you. All right, so cost recovery, right? So you heard me mention earlier, you know, I understand that there is a FERC filing process, and when you start thinking about those 4 principles we laid out, you know, is it simple? Is it efficient? You know, there's definitely areas of opportunity. So in your comments, you know, if cost recovery is important to you, help us frame up what that problem statement looks like, right? What challenges do you face today, and what could be done about it from an automated perspective, what that might look like, things like that, to help inform that straw proposal. Bidding flexibility. So this is something that, you know, I've had preview to over the past few years, working with several parties on some of the gas management challenges they're having and things like that. You know, I hear the 10%, 110% cap or 125% cap is a little too restrictive. You know, obviously, when you go back to some of those principles that I laid out, or some of those scoping items, it was, you know, bidding flexibility to ensure costs are accurately reflected and that they're verifiable, right? So what does that look like? What is the problem statement today with that 125% cap? Okay, so I just kind of wanted to throw those out there and how to think about these scoping items. I definitely look forward to everyone's ideas through those comments. And again, if you're willing to comment now on a potential scope item, I would like to hear it. I would definitely like to hear what the community thinks about it. We do have a little bit of time. So let me pause there, see if I get any reaction for the scoping items that are listed here, what those problem statements might look like, some of the challenges there, or how they fall short, keeping in mind those 4 principles, or any new scoping item. Michelle.
So I agree with what I commented, that it'll be good to have some discussion of when they tried to align this back in 2015. I did talk to some of the participants and some individuals that were part of this, and one of the big things is that when this was going on, the gas generators were base loaded, so it was really straightforward to manage the gas. I mean, even in 2016, they were base loaded, but as renewables started getting introduced, they started cycling these units, and I think that's where it became evident that it might have not been that big of a problem back in 2015, but as it became more volatile, it's becoming more evident that the gas and electric markets should align.
Yeah, and I'll definitely capture that, Michelle, and we'll take that back as, something I'll ask one of the ISO staff and subject matter experts to present on when we kind of do that baseline to create that foundation across the group. Danny, I see your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Michelle, I wanted to respond, and just be clear, I think this is something we're open to considering. That there were real trade-offs the last time we considered that, so I just want everybody to go into this process with eyes open on what those trade-offs might be as we reconsider this.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Any other thoughts or comments? Anything jumping out at anybody from a scope item perspective? All right, not hearing anything, so let me go ahead. Oh, I see Grant. Go ahead, Grant.
The whole thing with gas and it aligning with the market and cost recovery. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
no.
a little. Yeah, it's kind of hard to hear you, Grant. If you wouldn't mind speaking up. And
yeah, is that better?
Obviously, state. Yeah, much better. And it looks like you're with Wellhead Power.
Yes, sorry. This is Grant McDaniel with Wellhead Power Exchange. Yeah, so one of the things that that we see, I don't have a problem with knowing that my gas price might change intraday. I take that into account, right? I might be bidding, adjust my bids accordingly to what I think the gas movement might be. My problem is that when I get my bids mitigated, the mitigated bids do not. And if there's a major gas movement and my bids were mitigated, that's where I have problems that I think we need to address. And I think that's something we can look at overall throughout the market.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up, the mitigation and default energy bids and things like that, because that is something I saw a lot talked about in CCW, as well as some of the more recent comments. So I think that, Grant, if you wouldn't mind providing that in your comments as a potential scope topic, I'm willing to make a good bet there that you would get quite a bit of support behind that as a potential item to talk about in this forum. Appreciate you sharing that comment. All right, any other comments? All right, I see Sylvie with her hand up. Go ahead, Sylvie.
I think on Michelle's point, maybe we can think about how the increasing volatility of gas market and gas market prices might pose an issue, and where the opportunities are to start addressing those, whether it's, in forecasting or something else, but volatility, the associated risks, and ways to assess that.
Got it. Kind of going back to that problem statement.
Yeah, and maybe if Michelle wants to jump in, if I accurately captured some of those issues.
Michelle, do you mind raising your hand? Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, can you repeat that question?
Yeah. Sylvie, did you want to, or would you like me to?
I'm still unmuted. I'm happy to. Yeah, there we go.
Go for it.
I just wanted to see if I could capture the issues that you brought up on aligning the electricity and gas market timeline. Since 2013, it sounds like there's been a significant increase in volatility, which has made procurement decisions more difficult. So maybe the associated problem statement here could be risk evaluating the risk, assessing the problems associated with volatility, and things along that line.
Yeah, so I mean, to touch more like on just like the general point, it's more the volatility of it. Before in 2013, we could more accurately forecast the gas that was getting procured day ahead, although the markets have never aligned. Now that they're not aligning and there's not an accurate gas forecast projecting this market, that's where it's causing an issue. Then you have when renewables come in and they deck us down and we have procured this gas, sometimes we have to sell it off at a loss or vice versa, buy additional gas. I didn't want to touch into this, but a key point to put in to also add is that now some of the pipelines are not as reliable. They call operational flow orders more frequently than they did 10 years ago. So maybe I think one of the biggest solutions to this is the gas forecasting tool to predict what we're going to be dispatching at.
All right, appreciate that. And I definitely look forward to your comments on this, Michelle. Thank you. All right, I don't see any more hands, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide here and kind of start talking about, you know, in developing potential discussion topics, right? And I kind of covered this already, but I'm gonna go ahead and cover it again just to kind of reiterate, you know, how do these relate to the existing market processes and functionality? What kind of data or analysis would help illustrate and justify some of these problem statements? And then think about the overall priority, you know, when we start laying out all these different problem statements and potential scope items. I think as a group collectively, we really are looking for stakeholders to inform that prioritization, right? And I think that prioritization is going to lean heavily on market impact, right? How important is this to the market and to your organizations? So I'm definitely looking forward to all of that feedback, and keep that in mind as you kind of start thinking about what type of scope items and problem statements you would like to see tackled as it pertains to gas management in the market. All right, I believe this is our last slide. So next steps, so what you can expect. So we will be posting a discussion paper on this gas resource management stakeholder page. Here's the link for you. Something that I think would be a really good idea for the entire community is to kind of talk about and have the ISO present on current functionality that exists today, right? I expect stakeholders to review that discussion paper that's going to get posted and submit topics and comments and scope items that you would like to see covered. So we'll be sure to cover those and kind of summarize those in the next working group that's currently scheduled for August 22nd. And then any stakeholders that are willing to present on problem statements that they tee up, reach out to myself or Isabella, and we'll be happy to take those. Let me pause there, see if there's any other comments, questions, or anything like that. That is our last slide today that we wanted to talk about with the community. Not hearing anything. So either I did a really good job of framing up some of the problems that I was able to derive some of those past initiatives and conversations, or you guys are already typing some of those scope items away in those comments. Either way, I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everyone. Now, Brenda, did you want to close this out, or Danny, Sylvie, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we conclude today's discussion? All right, I see Sylvie with her hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that during this working group process, as Mark had already extrapolated on, we will be doing a lot of work and assessment on the current functionality of the market and looking for data to really support the future initiatives. So it'd be great if participants can not only think about those problem statements, but also start thinking about the data and assessment needs that are associated with them, so that we can get, you know, more of an entrenched conversation going.
Thank you, Sylvie. Good point. All right. Brenda, did you want to close this out? And again, this was a recorded session, so it will be posted out on the Gas Resource Management stakeholder page.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I truly enjoyed being part of this experience with the Gas Resource Management Group. We do look forward to our other stakeholders who are interested in other working groups that are kicking off next month. And one of those is price formation enhancements. We also have the energy storage workshop. And another one that just got noticed today, the summer market performance report for June 2023. We'll be posting that report later today, but we just want to give everyone a heads up. That's an hour discussion, informational call with Guillermo and market analysis team. And so with that, please take a note on all those notices. We do have those up to date. And if time changes, we will let everyone know as well. These links are also providing all these documentation. But other than that, I don't have any other following support from stakeholder side, but I'll pass it on to my event producer, Michelle, to close this call.
Thank you for joining today's call, and thank you for using event services. Your call has concluded, and you may disconnect.